1 year to GST, so let's analyze what's been the good, what's been the bad, and where would things move from here. We've got on board with us Suresh Rohira, the partner at Grant Thornton India, joining us on the show right now. Suresh, hi, good morning. You know, we've been chatting with two managements on the show today. We had Sheela Foam and then we have Century Plyboards as well. And both of them seem to indicate that, you know, the picture is very different from the GST tax collections that we hear from the government. And there hasn't been much of a shift, or they've not really gained in terms of business because of GST implementation. They're saying that people still know how to move around the network, how to evade taxes, and they have found newer ways. And and they're still grappling when it comes to their, you know, volume numbers. Would you say GST, looking back 1 year, has been a success?
Well, Aisha, first thing, let me acknowledge that last year, you know, when we took off leaving 17 taxes and 23 cesses behind. And while I say that, you know, the journey has been partly turbulent, considering the way initial teething problems were. But I must say that so far, considering the magnitude of our economy, the GST implementation has been fairly decent. That's one. Secondly, in terms of government trying to gain more revenue, of course, that's their endeavor, and they have tried doing so by plugging the loopholes in terms of e-way bill and so on and so forth. Of course, there is still a lot to be done in GST, and I would say in the days to come, they are going to try and plug those loopholes and see how they can streamline businesses, especially from an MSME perspective.
Hi, Mr. Rohira. Good morning. Thanks for joining in. I want to talk to you about the fact that, you know, when we compare our own GST reform versus what we have seen in terms of the model adopted by countries like Canada, etc. Naturally, we do have a couple of more slabs. Our structure is different, but I guess that would be the need for India, given that we have a unique economy. The fact that, you know, it's not possible for us to have just 2-3 rates when there are so much income disparities, you know, and for an indirect tax regime, which is anyway not a progressive tax regime, it would be an important one. But do you believe that GST has been able to achieve those targets, has been able to, well, for one, has it been able to plug those loopholes which perhaps the VAT and the excise duty system could not, despite having all these multiple tax brackets, despite having the complexities in relation to these multiple tax brackets?
Well, the first point, you know, let me throw some light. Considering other geographies like Canada, Australia, Malaysia, Singapore, the economy and the tax slabs there, of course, would differ than India. And I would like to quote what recently our Prime Minister just mentioned about Mercedes vis-a-vis the rates for milk. They cannot be the same. And the reason why I say, because our economy is such. If we were to peg everything in one slab, then definitely it's not going to be a good step for the country. And therefore, I must say that today, while we are at 4 slabs, the government should look at bringing them to 3 probably. That's one. Secondly, in terms of the way forward, certainly the government is trying to plug those loopholes and see how they can standardize these rates. Especially looking at the sectors. So, for example, cements and paints, we recently heard the Finance Secretary that they would be looking at these products to bring them down from the higher slab to a mid slab. So, I must say that, you know, one cannot compare these two economies, but yes, we are on that path. And I would say 1 year down the line today, the journey has been not so turbulent as we were initially perceiving it to be so.
You know, I was just going to come to that, because the interim finance minister Piyush Goyal has hinted that GST could see fewer slabs in the days to come once tax collections do stabilize. He said that he's working on a single return under GST for smaller traders, and the GST exemption threshold could be now raised to 1.5 crores of turnover. Where do you think the tweaks and twists would really come in, if indeed GST were to be tweaked from here onwards, once, like he's saying, Piyush Goyal, GST collections do stabilize?
Well, the first point in terms of the returns, of course, the group of ministers did several rounds of meetings and they are working on a single return. And as recent as day before yesterday, we heard Mr. Hasmukh Adhia mentioning that probably it will take another 6 months' time. And I'm sure that the government would be ready this time with giving some trial runs for the industry vis-a-vis what happened in the past. So as far as the return is concerned, my viewpoint is very clear that we should have one return vis-a-vis 2 or 3 returns as the scenario prevails today. That's one. Secondly, in terms of revenues, I would say they are trying to look at adding on certain sectors. As you know, petroleum sector is on the cards. And while I talk of petroleum sector, of course, all the 5 products cannot be brought under the net overnight. So they are going to look at natural gas and ATF to be brought in gradually. Now, having said so, would that resolve the problem completely? I wouldn't think so, because one is bringing the petroleum sector under the GST net. However, knowing that the states are enjoying certain revenues from those products. But the second point is allowing credits. So it is important to allow credits of those products, and only then in the entire value chain one would be able to see manufacturing or services cost reducing going forward. So that's an important step which I feel the government is looking at, and they should be working on this expeditiously.
You mentioned about that one single form, one single return under GST. I want to know that, Grant Thornton as a firm, have you all seen a step up in compliance, especially from, SMEs or from smaller, perhaps semi-organized enterprises, given that, of course, those are the guys that are going to approach a Grant Thornton. Have you seen a step up in compliance? Because one thing's for certain, the number of assessees under the old Indirect Tax Acts versus, of course, GST has definitely increased. The revenues as well are slowly and steadily increasing more towards 90,000 crores versus, 85 to 90,000 crores. So have you seen, of course, organized players anyway had stepped up on the GST, infrastructure, etc., the bigger guys, but from the SME size as well, have you seen better compliance?
So let me first acknowledge this, that, under the erstwhile indirect tax regime, the registrations were close to around 60,000 plus. However, in terms of GST, we have crossed 1.1 crore registrations. So that's a clear signal that we are almost doubling up in terms of registration, and therefore those many companies are wanting to come under the net for 2 reasons. One is for ensuring that they are entitled for those credits, and consequently the compliances are therefore being met by them. But having said that, there are challenges in terms of compliances which the government is looking at in terms of one return. Of course, for services sector, I would say the compliances have increased, where in the erstwhile regime one had an ability to file centralized, service tax return. Vis-a-vis in GST, they have to do that in every state. So the compliances have increased, but with plugging these loopholes of single return, I'm sure it will definitely ease or bring ease to the businesses going forward.
And of course, we also have the e-way bill, Mr. Rohira, not to mention, we've spoken to a lot of companies and they as well have said that e-way bill has been a big game changer, plugging all the loopholes, especially in the value chain with all the check posts, etc. But great discussion, Mr. Rohira. Thanks so much then for joining us on this mega event, 1 year of a major tax reform that has been brought about by the government. So far, so good, not such a turbulent journey. A number of registered assessees as well have increased, but yeah, compliance, that will only slowly and steadily increase.